but they add the words that are excluded in the West. They say, yeah, he committed those crimes with your support. Okay, rather crucial omission, which you never hear from Tony Blair and the rest. But they are not that indoctrinated, so they remember that those elementary truths. And those are other reasons why, if you want, there's hatred against us. Furthermore, there's absolutely nothing new about this. Anybody who wants to understand any of it knows exactly where to go. You go to the declassified U.S. record. U.S. is a very open society. We have declassified records of internal deliberations from the past. All these questions came up decades ago. So and had the same answers. In 1958, crucial year for many reasons. I'm now talking about internal records. The U.S., so the Eisenhower administration, discussed three major crises for the United States. One was Indonesia, one was North Africa, the third was the Middle East. All Islamic countries, all oil producers. The question arose whether the Russians were involved. That was dismissed as ludicrous, no Russian involvement. It's just independent nationalism in the three countries, which was the main crisis. Then Eisenhower pointed out, with regard to the Middle East, in his words approximately, he said there is a campaign of hatred against us, not by the governments, but by the people. And that was an issue that was discussed. No globalization, no, they hate us because we have McDonald's and none of this stuff. Why is there a campaign of hatred against us? Well, the National Security Council discussed it. That's the highest analysis and planning body. And they said the problem is that there's a perception among the people of the region that the United States supports corrupt and harsh regimes which prevent democratization and development, and does so because of its interest in controlling Near East oil. And they said it's hard to counter this perception because it's true. And furthermore, it should be true because we should support those regimes in order to maintain our control over Near East oil. So therefore, there is a campaign of hatred against us by the people who see that we're robbing their resources and preventing democracy and development. But, we can't do much about it because that's what we ought to be doing. Well, like I say, no McDonald's, no envying us our magnificence, no globalization, just perfectly obvious things. Same reason why there was a campaign of hatred against England from the people of India, or against Holland from the people of the East Indies, and so on and so forth. Yeah, you crush people under your boot, they don't like it. So there's a campaign of hatred against you. In fact, what they were discussing internally in 1958 is the same as what the Wall Street Journal found in 2001, and for the same reasons, because the policies haven't fundamentally changed. So we understand. The Wall Street Journal only was concerned with elite opinion. If they'd gone down to the slums of Cairo, they would have gotten stronger opinions, but of the same kind, and more different ones also. Because in the slums of Cairo, they wouldn't like the fact that the wealth of the region is going to the West and not to the people of the region. The ones who the Wall Street Journal was talking about are quite happy about that, because they're part of the ruling elite and they enrich themselves while the resources go to the West. So they're part of the imperial system. So you get different opinions if you bother to ask people in the so-called streets. But fundamentally, it's the same. So there's a So bin Laden's messages certainly resonate, and people agree with a lot of the things he's saying. About 80% of Egyptians, for example, say that the most important issue to them is the crushing of the Palestinians. So when they hear bin Laden say it, they agree. There's nothing to do with whether they like him or hate him. On the other hand, there is a clique of radical Islamists who were organized and trained and brought together by Western intelligence for their own purposes, and have continued to do for 20 years just what they've always said they were going to do. So while some things are obscure, I don't think these are obscure. I think the answers are quite transparent. The proper topic for an occasion like this, I suppose, is pretty obvious. it would be the question of how the media have handled the major story of the past months. And there's no question about what that is, that the issue is the war on terrorism, so-called, and specifically in the Islamic world. Incidentally, by media here, I intend the term to be understood pretty broadly, so including journals of commentary, analysis, opinion, in fact, the intellectual culture generally. It's a really important topic. It's been reviewed regularly by FAIR, by others. However, it isn't really an appropriate topic for a talk, and the reason is that it requires too much detailed analysis. So what I'd like to do is take a somewhat different approach to it and ask the question, how should the story be handled in accord with general principles that are accepted as guidelines, so principles of fairness and accuracy and relevance and so on. Let's approach this by kind of a thought experiment. Imagine an intelligent Martian. Incidentally, I'm told that by convention Martians are male, so I'll refer to it as he. So suppose that this Martian went to Harvard and Columbia Journalism School and learned all sorts of high-minded things and actually believes them. How would the Martian handle a story like this? Well, I think he would begin with some factual observations that he'd send back to the journal in Mars. One factual observation is that the war on terrorism was not declared on September 11th. Rather, it was redeclared using the same rhetoric as the first declaration 20 years earlier. The Reagan administration, as you know, I'm sure, came into office announcing that a war on terrorism would be the core of U.S. foreign policy, and it condemned what the president called the evil scourge of terrorism. The main focus was state-supported international terrorism in the Islamic world, and at that time also in Central America. International terrorism was described as a plague spread by depraved opponents of civilization itself in a return to barbarism in the modern age. Actually, I'm quoting the administration moderate, Secretary of State George Shultz. Reagan's the phrase I quoted from Reagan actually had to do with the Middle East, terrorism in the Middle East, and it was in the year 1955. That was the year in which international terrorism in that region was selected by editors as the lead story of the year in an annual AP poll. So point one that our Martian would report is that the year 2001 is the second time that this has been the main lead story, and that the war on terrorism has been redeclared pretty much as before. Furthermore, there's a striking continuity. The same people are in leading positions. So Donald Rumsfeld, who's running the military component of the second phase of the war on terrorism, he was Reagan's special envoy to the Middle East during the first phase of the war on terrorism, including the peak year, 1985. The person who was just appointed a couple months ago to be in charge of the diplomatic component of the war at the United Nations is John Negroponte, who during the first phase was supervising U.S. operations in Honduras, which